The words of my mouth and the meditations of our hearts be always acceptable in thy sight, O Lord, our strength and our Redeemer. Amen. I was telling a friend just the other day that I'm always tempted on Easter with everything going on just to get up here and say, Happy Easter, and then sit down. But not this year. One of my Easter memories from childhood is always of having a new dress to wear on Easter Sunday. This was a long-standing custom in my family, new clothes for Easter. And though I knew, of course, having grown up in the church, that religiously speaking, Easter's supposed to be about the resurrection of Jesus, for me, the new Easter clothes sure went a long way to making it a great day. When I became a mother myself, I began to realize that one very practical reason for the new clothes at Easter was that, especially when my sisters and I were very young, we had outgrown the old Easter dresses. They just didn't fit anymore. But you know, I don't remember any Easter when I thought about the old ones that much. In fact, more often than not, I was quite ready to let those old clothes go in favor of putting on the new. Interesting that clothes come up again in this morning's gospel. In John's gospel, which we read this morning, the clothes are Jesus' burial clothes. And they seem to play a very important part in the way John tells the story. They seem to be somewhat instrumental in whatever led Peter and John himself to suspect that maybe something more than an empty tomb was at play here. Now you remember, I just read it, according to the Gospel of John, Mary Magdalene gets to the tomb first, fully expecting to find Jesus right where they had left him. And when she discovers that he is missing, she thinks probably what just about any one of us would have thought if that had happened to us. Oh my God, they've stolen him! So she runs off to get some help. She runs back to get the guys who are hiding out in this little room lest the same fate befall them. And they are so taken with what she says and worried that perhaps somebody now really has stolen the body that they run out, tear out of the room where they were hiding, and go off to see what in the world is going on. And sure enough, when they get there, it is just as Mary said. He's missing. All that's left are the linen wrappings, his burial clothes. John looks first because he got there first. And he's so upset when he peeks in and can't see the body that he doesn't even go in. When he sees just these burial clothes lying on a heap in the floor, he just stays where he is, maybe even turns his back. But Peter, on the other hand, good old impetuous Peter, he walks straight through the opening to what would have been a cave. That's what the tomb would have looked like. He goes in and he looks around, and he does see this heap of burial clothes, but then he notices something else. He notices that the cloth that had been around Jesus' head isn't with the other pile of clothes. Instead, it's been neatly rolled up and is lying somewhere else, a short distance away. And for some reason, this struck Peter as odd. So he goes out to tell John about it. And John then did go in so he could see for himself. And according to John, because remember it's John who is telling this story, according to John, it's when he went back in and saw what Peter told him about, saw not only that heap of clothes, but this headcloth lying in another place, all neatly rolled up. It's then, John says, that he began to believe something different may have happened. Something other than a band of grave robbers stealing the body. We're not told why seeing this pile of clothes made such a difference to them. It was just their experience. It just did for some reason. Maybe they couldn't figure out why grave robbers would have taken the time to undress him, and especially the time to take that headcloth and roll it up so neatly when they would have had to be working very quickly to escape the Roman guards who were guarding the tomb. We don't know. All we know is that there's something that puzzled them about it, and that they still didn't quite understand. what that meant. It wasn't until later that they had an experience like Mary Magdalene was about to have. An experience where they encountered the risen Lord on the loose. But even Mary, though she's the first disciple to encounter the risen Lord, she doesn't recognize him at first. He doesn't look the same. In fact, she thinks at first he is a gardener and hopes that maybe he knows what happened to the body of Jesus. It's only when he speaks her name, Mary, that she recognizes the man in gardener's clothes as the very Lord she thought was missing. She recognizes him not by sight, because the risen Jesus is not just a rerun of the face and figure she knew so well and had just said goodbye to 3 days before. She recognizes him in the encounter. And so it is for all the disciples as the many different stories of their encounters with the risen Lord unfold. They never recognize him by sight. He doesn't look the way they remembered him looking. They only recognize him by what he does and how he is with them. Like when he shows up on the other side of a locked door in the room where they're hiding and shaking in fear and speaks a familiar message to them. Peace be with you. Or like when he has compassion on the doubts and fears of Thomas, who needed to see for himself, and comes back to show him the marks of his wounds. Or like when he surprises them and catches their attention by doing something with them that he's done before, something like breaking bread or frying fish. He comes to them clothed in different ways at different times. And over time, he begins to come to others clothed as them. That's the miracle of the risen Lord. Not that the tomb was empty, but that the risen Christ and those who are raised with him do not just exist in some far-off place that has nothing to do with the world as we know it, but instead their shared Easter life is a very present reality with us now. And a very important aspect of that present reality is that they continue to share their Easter life with men and women like you and me, clothed in many different ways. Sometimes this Easter life is shared with us in the form of a friend or a stranger who steps through the walls of our own closed doors to bring to our lives that peace that Jesus promised he would leave with us all. Other times, this Easter life is shared with us by someone who has had the same kind of wounds that we have and who responds to our own doubts and fears with a healing touch. And then there are those times when this Easter life is shared as we break bread with family and friends and simply somehow become aware in that moment that there's more to the gathering than meets the eye. If we have eyes to see, we will recognize Jesus' presence and the presence of all who have been raised with him in these times. Of course, the operative words are, if we have eyes to see. Because if we don't develop an eye for his coming to us in many different clothes, we will miss it. And if we become so fond of the old clothes we have attached to him that we will not accept anything new, but continue to try to make the old ones fit even though we have outgrown them, we will miss him again. Because the resurrected Lord has been turned loose on the world. As the preacher Barbara Brown Taylor once said, we cannot nail him down. We tried once, and it got loose. And because the resurrected Jesus is indeed on the loose, he tends to show up whenever, wherever, and however he pleases. sometimes clothed as the gardener, sometimes clothed as a friend or a stranger, sometimes clothed simply in the times that we come face to face with ourselves. Maybe my instincts as a child weren't too far off. Maybe there is something to be said for understanding that the resurrection really does have quite a bit to do with how we are clothed, with whether we are still trying to live in the world, clothed in ways we have outgrown, or whether we are ready to greet each new day in our Easter suits. Amen.